color red as a low note and the color violet as a high note. A rainbow is a major chord, and a lakeside sunset is a concerto. Lynn McTaggart wrote, "Our brain is not a storage medium, but a receiving mechanism in every sense, and memory is simply a distant cousin of ordinary perception. The brain retrieves old information the same way it processes new information, through holographic transformation of wave interference patterns. Lashley's rats with the fried brains were able to conjure up their run in its entirety because the memory of it was never burned away in the first place. Whatever reception mechanism was left in the brain, and as Pribram had demonstrated, it was distributed all over the brain, was tuning back into the memory through the field. Some scientists went as far to suggest that all of our higher cognitive processes result from an interaction with the zero-point field. This kind of constant interaction might account for intuition or creativity, and how ideas come to us in bursts of insight, sometimes in fragments, but often as a miraculous whole. An intuitive leap might simply be a sudden coalescence of coherence in the field. If you take a piece of regular film and cut it up, your image is destroyed forever. However, when you cut up a piece of holographic film, the image is never destroyed. A smaller scale version of the image always exists. If memories were stored locally like regular film, and you cut out that part of the brain, the memory would be lost. But in reality, like holographic film, when you cut out parts of the brain, a smaller scale version of the memory always exists. So just as a piece of holographic film stores complete images as interference patterns throughout its entirety, the human brain stores complete memories as interference patterns throughout its entirety. And just like a laser light focused on a piece of holographic film creates a seemingly physical three-dimensional image, the light of our consciousness focusing on quanta creates a seemingly physical three-dimensional world. Stanislav Grof wrote, "The holographic model offers revolutionary possibilities for a new understanding of the relationships between the parts and the whole. No longer confined to the limited logic of traditional thought, the part ceases to be just a fragment of the whole, but, under certain circumstances, reflects and contains the whole. As individual human beings, we are not isolated and insignificant Newtonian entities. Rather, as integral fields of the hollow movement, each of us is also a microcosm that reflects and contains the macrocosm. If this is true, then we each hold the potential for having direct and immediate experiential access to virtually every aspect of the universe, extending our capacities well beyond the reach of our senses. Another markedly holographic processor present in our bodies and the universe is DNA. Watch any movie or TV series about crime scene investigation and notice that the identity of the culprit can be determined from tiny traces of their DNA. A drop of blood, a fingernail, or a single strand of hair is enough to positively identify the perpetrator. The reason for this is that DNA, like our brains, holographically mirrors each part in the whole and the whole in each part." David Icke wrote, "DNA, like RNA, emits light energy in the form of photons to such an extent that it has been compared by some to an ultra-weak laser. They generate coherent light in the same way that our technological lasers do, the lasers that create holograms. The universe broadcasts its signals in wave or interference patterns, and it may be that the laser light emitted by the DNA and RNA is part of the process of turning them into holographic representations of that waveform. One mystery of quantum physics is how particles can either express themselves as a waveform, non-physical, or as a particle, apparently physical, and the waveforms only become particles when they are being observed, when we are looking at them. What is actually happening is that the DNA, RNA, and brain is causing the waveform or interference pattern to project an illusory hologram. The act of observation, focus, projects the hologram from the waveform, and when this happens, the quantum physicists see the waveform becoming a particle. Both the waveform and the particle exist at the same time, and they don't move from one state to the other. When a laser is shown onto a photographic interference pattern to manifest a hologram, One does not replace the other. Both waveform and hologram coexist. It is just that the observer sees the hologram as the prime reality. The waveform is possibility. The particle is physical experience. Ever-increasing evidence overwhelmingly suggests that our brains, bodies, DNA, and the entire universe are non-local, holographic transducers incessantly interacting with a deeper quantum reality. This hollow movement is an undivided wholeness in flowing motion, where all perceived separation is ultimately illusory, like whirlpools in a river. Even the seeming separation of forms and consciousness into relatively independent subtotalities only exists at the explicate level. As David Bohm put it simply, deep down, the consciousness of mankind is one. David Icke wrote, "Scientists can't understand why subatomic particles can communicate instantly with each other over staggering distances, because they are thinking in terms of space. But there is no space involved. It is like the droplet of water in the ocean. There are no particles, plural, except in the way we perceive them in the illusion. All particles are the same one. They don't have to communicate between each other, because there is no each other, and they don't move from one place to another, because there is no space, and so can be no places. Appropriately, the word utopia means no place, beyond the illusion of time and space. The super-hologram appears to occupy space, and we talk of the vastness of space, but it's a hologram, and so that cannot be. If there is no space, how come we seem to travel through it? Once again, because that is the illusion our DNA and RNA decodes for us, and we travel through space only as electrical signals interpreted by the brain." Jake Horsley wrote, "Every particle in the universe is a carrier of knowledge. In other words, in some form or another, every particle can be said to be conscious. As humatons, we tend to assume that only we are conscious, because only we seem to be self-conscious. Not only that, we have attributed our consciousness to a single organ only, the brain, and it is possible we only use 10% of that organ with which to deduce all of this. It would seem to be equally possible, however, and a lot more logical, to assume that the brain is merely a receiver of information, a tuning dial that picks up data and translates it into sense impressions and rational thought, images, and so forth, and that knowledge as such, memory, is stored in every single atom of our bodies. For organic beings, the filing system provided for every living molecule is DNA. As such, if we were to tune in with the remaining 90% of our brains, we would be capable of receiving vastly greater amounts of data than we are presently accustomed to. Just as knowledge, memory, and experience is passed through generations of a given species, presumably via DNA, in order for the species to evolve as a whole, so information would appear to be shared freely amongst all the billions upon billions of particles that make up the physical universe. This is cooperation on a grand scale. Every particle is conscious. Every particle is potentially conscious of what every other particle is conscious of. And all particles are connected together into a single tapestry of consciousness, information, and energy, which is, it therefore follows, conscious of what every particle is conscious of, and conscious of itself as a unified whole, a living, conscious organism. Ergo, the universe is a superconscious being within which all beings exist and have life and consciousness. It is God, and every one of its parts and components, as in a hologram, in which each fragment contains the whole, is also God, the totality, in and of itself.